Okay, today's stuff we're going to learn is Megillah Daf Chavav. Okay, just to remind you, on Sunday, we're very excited to be launching our first real complete beginner's guide to Gemara, okay, which again doesn't mean you're going to know everything after you do the 3-part course, but it is going to mean you're going to get a lot of the basics. So again, it's geared toward people who've never learned Gemara before, people who've learned Gemara but never really learned the basics or not in a very organized manner. It could be, if that's the case, some things might be things that you already know, but I imagine no matter what, you'll learn new things. I even was talking to Leah about the course, and I even learned some new things from things she was telling me. So there's always what to be learning. So I invite you all to join the course. There's already more than 450 people signed up. You see how much interest there is in Gemara. Okay, the next thing I wanted to say is we have a new Facebook page. So we launched a Facebook page in English. So I invite you all to like the page. We figured instead of translating all of our materials, and sometimes there's certain things that are more of interest to Hebrew-speaking crowd, English-speaking crowd. Anyway, we started a new page, so please go and like our page. Okay, today's daf is sponsored by Shauna Winters in honor of Ruth Raskus. Thank you for your friendship and for inspiring so many. Here goes our daf. Very, very interesting daf. We're going to start with the beginning of the 4th chapter. The topic is what items can be sold and it's actually, I shouldn't even say that, because the Mishnah seems to be describing a situation where somebody sold something that was sanctified. And the question is, what can they do with the money? Okay, here it's even the city sold it, B'nai Ha'ir. The people of the city sold something. So some people, it's unclear whether you're allowed to sell these things or you're not really supposed to sell them. But if you do, then what do you do with the money? Before we even start, I want to go back to a concept that we've seen many times, but I want to review it in case maybe you've never seen it. Maybe you're new to Gemara. There's this concept. I'll give you an example of Masershini. So the second tithe, you're supposed to bring it to Jerusalem, but it's too far to schlep from all sorts of places to carry all your fruits to Jerusalem. So instead, you redeem them onto a coin and you bring the money to Jerusalem. Now, there's sanctity to the fruits of Masershini. So when you when you redeem it onto a coin, what happens? The sanctity moves onto the coin, and there's no longer sanctity on the fruits. So this is what we're going to talk about. If you sell a sanctified item, you now have money that's sanctified. The original item, well, it depends what it is, might lose its sanctity, okay, depending on whether it's right. If it's a Sefer Torah, it's not going to lose its sanctity because it's a Sefer Torah. But if it's, let's say, a space where a shul was, so there's no inherent sanctity to a space where a shul is, right? There's sanctity, but that sanctity can move on to a coin. And from there, the sanctity is removed from the shul. So in that case, right, so then, what can you do with the shul? That's going to be more tomorrow's daf. But today's daf is going to be, what can you do with that money? Okay, the money. So we're going to start off with the concept here behind everything is ma'alim b'kodesh v'lo moridim. You can always go up in level of sanctity, but you can't go lower. So we're now going to have a list of the hierarchy of sanctity of items. So we're starting with the rechovah shel ir. You might remember this term from Ta'aniyot, that on fast days and when the Ma'amadot would pray, those were the people who would pray that the sacrifice would be accepted, they would do it in the city square. Okay, it's like a big, many cities have this. It's a big kikar, a square in the middle of the city, and they would daven there. So again, it wasn't a regular place of davening. It was used once in a while for public fasts, for that. So it has sanctity, but in our list of sanctified items, it's the least. So if you sell it, now what does it mean to sell? I guess you sell it as a space. Someone wants to build some building, right? This goes on all the time. Take public space from the city and you turn it into private space or business space or whatever it might be. They want to build something there. So you can use that money to buy what? You have to go up a level. So you can't buy another city square, but you can buy a Beit HaKnesset. Oh, I should say, by the way, shouldn't even say necessarily you can't. One other thing that's not going to be clear that we're going to ask tomorrow is, and there's 2 questions really come up from our Mishnah. One, can you sell what we call lichatchila ab initio, or is this just, again, the language is if they sold it, but it doesn't necessarily say they're allowed to sell it. And number 2, can you sell it? The question tomorrow is going to be, can you sell a Sefer Torah? So we'll get to that. That's the highest level here, and buy another Sefer Torah with the money. Here it seems to imply you can only go up. It's not clear if you could stay at the same level. Can you buy another Rechovah Shel Ir? Seems to be implied here that not. But when we read the second part of the Mishnah, you could really imply the reverse. So that's why it's not really clear. Look, so you can go up a level. What's up a level? Beit HaKnesset. Okay, Beit HaKnesset. What if you sell a shul? Lokrim teva. You can use the money to buy an Aron Kodesh, a place to put the Sefer Torah in, because that's more sanctified because it houses the Torah rather than the Beit Knesset that houses people and other things that rather than just a Torah. Teva, if you sell the Aron Kodesh, lokrim et pachot. What's more sanctified than the Aron Kodesh? It's holding the Sefer Torah, the cover that's directly over the Sefer Torah. Mitpachot, the cover that's over the Sefer Torah, yikhu sfarim. You can buy the actual books with it, but what are books here? They're not books like a chumash. They're books, they mean nevi'im uktuvim. They're talking about parchments of nevi'im and ktuvim, which is the one level up above that. And obviously up above that, sfarim lokchim Torah. In Torah, we're now at the highest level here. Haval. But imachru Torah, now we're going to do the reverse of the Mishnah. If they sold a Torah, lo yikhu sfarim, sfarim lo yikhu mitpachot, mitpachot lo yikhu teva, teva lo yikhu beit knesset, beit knesset lo yikhu et harechov. So there we do the exact reverse, which that shows you, by the way, that it's not clear whether it can be equal level, because it says you have to go up a level when you sell, and then it says you can't go down a level. Just say you can't go down a level, it sounds like you could maybe stay at the same level. But if you focus on the beginning part, you can go up a level. It sounds like you can only go up a level and you can't go down a level. You can't stay on the same level. So obviously that's the part that we're going to see tomorrow that's not so clear from the Mishnah. So I'm not going to review all the wording because it's the exact same in terms of basically you can go down, you can't go down in sanctity. Last two words of the Mishnah, b'chein b'motrehen. The same thing with money that's left over from a sale. Okay, the Gemara is going to ask tomorrow also what sale? Is it a sale? Is it what if something else? But anyway, what if it was from money collected to buy one of these items? But basically it sounds like it's saying if you had a sale, you sold something and then you bought with it what you were allowed to buy with it, but there was some money left over. It cost you less money. So what can you do with the extra money? The same that you could do with the money itself. Okay, it's not like, oh, this is left over, we can just put it back and do whatever we want with it. No. Has to go toward whatever the original money was able to go toward. So now we're going to start with the Gemara, and we're going to learn that the first halacha about this Rechovah Shel Ir is a machloket. Not everybody agrees that there's sanctity to the Rechovah Shel Ir. B'nei Ir shemachru Rechovah Shel Ir. Amar Rabba bar Yochanan amar Rabbi Yochanan zo divrei Rabbi Nachman bar Yossi stim ta'ah. This is Rabbi Nachman bar Yossi stim ta'ah. Okay, how exactly we translate stim ta'ah? Okay, like the stam. Anyway, we're going to leave that aside right now. Aval chachamim omrim, but the rabbis say harechov ein bo mishum kedusha. The rabbis don't see any sanctity to this space. Okay, so I was thinking about it, right? And I'll give you an example. In central Tel Aviv, there's what we call Kikar Rabin, right? Very famous. So it's a very big central square. Now, I don't know, I can't remember now, but I would imagine sometimes, right, it could be used for some big prayer service, right? I don't know if it ever was. I'm trying to remember, I rack my brain and think about it, but let's say, right, as opposed to, let's say you use the kotel for a big prayer service, right? You use the kotel for a big prayer service, that's a sanctified space. But Kikar Rabin, which is used for all sorts of other things, right? They have rallies there all the time and they have all sorts of things. And if they have tefillot there, let's say the people in Tel Aviv decide this is our gathering space. We want to do a massive, right? What's good about it is a massive space. You can fit a ton of people. So let's do a big, massive tefillah there. And they do it, once in a while, whenever they need. Does that mean that Kikar Rabin has sanctity to it? Okay. And the other example I wanted to bring, which I see you're pointing out, which is, I wanted to give the example of my shul. Okay. My shul has not been inside our shul building since Corona started. Okay. Don't daven in the shul anymore. We daven every week outside. Now, it's very interesting because generally there's all sorts of laws to the sanctity of a shul. And I think about this a lot when I'm in shul. I think about right, I'm davening outside. We're not in a shul. On the other hand, we've been here for almost 2 years. So at a certain point, does that become a space of prayer, right? On the one hand, it's, part of it when we daven Friday night is literally on the street. People pass by there all the time. There's cars honking on the street. Like it's not exactly a sanctified space. On the other hand, we daven here all the time. So it's very hard to understand. Is this, right? What's the level of sanctity here? It's a weekly, it's got the status of a weekly shul. So it's a very interesting question. So that's exactly the machloket here. So the rabbis say there's no sanctity to it at all. And basically the rabbis wouldn't, if they were writing the Mishnah and this were their opinion, they would definitely not have that listed here. So now they say, Rabbi Menachem bar Yossi, my time, what's his reason? That's the go-to space where people go to. So yes, it has sanctity. For Rabbanan, I would cry ba'alma. It's just because it happens to be the place. It's not like there's any unique thing to the space, and they happen to go there because that's where there is, but it's not really a sanctified space. It's an interesting debate. Beit HaKnesset, Lokchim Teva. Okay, now we're going to move to the next one. You sell a shul, you can buy an Aron Kodesh. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan, and for a while we're going to deal with this statement, so pay close attention. Lo shanu ela Beit HaKnesset shel kfarim. We're only talking about shuls in villages. Ava. Beit HaKnesset shel kachim. And this is a very fascinating line and a little bit hard to understand because we don't really understand the reality of what they were living, how things work then. But Beit Knesset of a big city, since people come to this shul from all over, lo matzu mizapnele. You cannot sell this space to havele di rabim. It's owned by many people. Okay, now why do other people? Just because I show up at a shul I'm from a different city and I show up in the shul once in a while, or maybe once in my life, that makes the shul mine, according to this Gemara. Okay, what this shul is saying is, now there's a bunch of ways you can look at this. Either it serves many people and therefore you can't just sell it. Like maybe it's in the interest of the people in the city to sell it for whatever reason. Maybe they don't need it anymore. But since it serves people from all around, they don't have the rights to sell it. I'm thinking of like public companies or something, and they're owned by, all their shareholders. And some people say this is a financial thing. The people give money to it because people come and visit and they give money. And this happens, by the way, right? You go to a shul in Europe or Beit Chabad, or, sometimes you feel, oh, I should give a donation because I benefited, or someone, they give you an aliyah and therefore you give money, or all sorts of ways where people go to shuls from abroad and they give money. So according to, if you understand it, that it's financial, which some of the commentaries do, you actually have rights in that shul because you put money down, which sounds crazy, right? That's why I was thinking of a public company, right? I buy shares in the company. I buy a few shares. I don't really feel like I'm an owner of the company, but the truth is legally, I have some sort of ownership rights for the company, right? I can vote on certain things. So either we say you can't sell it because it serves many people, and therefore, even if it's in the interest of your city to sell it, you still have to worry about other people maybe won't have a shul to go to when they come to your city. Or maybe the issue is that they have financial rights and therefore there's no real owner. And that seems to be the more standard reading of this text, that because they gave money to the shul, they have ownership rights and therefore there's no real owner. It's basically owned by everybody. So you can't sell unless everybody agrees to the sale. So Amar Rav Ashi, right? This is why public companies, right, have to have all sorts of rules, who decides and all that, because otherwise it's a nightmare. You have, hundreds of thousands of people who own your company. You can't ever make a decision. So, right, it doesn't exactly work this way. Amar Rav Ashi, Hai be knishta demata machasve. Now we're going to see an exception to the rule. And there's a very interesting exception. And it's almost a little hubris of Rav Ashi saying this, but obviously he had reason to say this. The Beit Knesset demata machasve, and we'll see later in a different Gemara where it talks about the history of the shul that he built demata machasve. Af agav de me'alma atula. Even though people come from all over, people come to the shul for me, I can choose to sell it or not. He basically says, yes, this is a public shul, but I'm the owner, right? I get to decide. So what was I thinking of? I was thinking of nonprofits, right? You have a nonprofit organization run by some very impressive person. Now, a lot of people will give money because of that person. Now, does that mean that, let's say, right, you give money, though, because the person's running a particular organization. Let's say that person decides, I don't want to run this organization anymore. I want to run something else. And they change the whole thing. Do they have rights to take the money that you gave them and put it towards something else, right? Can they say, well, look, you gave me the money because you invested in me. So I can do with this, right? And the same for a company, right? I can do with this what I see the right thing to do. But is that true or not, right? Or are they giving it to you, right? It's the same for, a company that raises money to go public with something or to, start up. Are you allowed, right? Are they, and it's always a question, right? Are they investing because they believe in what you're doing? Sometimes they really just believe in you. And I think more often people will give money to someone that they trust. And therefore, it's a good question here. So Rav Ashi says, everyone who comes here is coming here for me. So if I decide to do something else with it, I can, because it's really my shul. Very interesting line. Okay, now we're going to go back to this basic concept, though. Let's forget about the exception. Let's go back to the concept. The concept is a Beit Knesset of the public people, right? That belongs, any Beit Knesset in a city belongs to the public. So now we're going to raise a few questions. Meitive, question from a Tannaitic source. That's what the word Meitive comes to say. We're going to bring a braita that contradicts what you said. So, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Maseh bebeit knesset shel Tursiyim. There was a beit knesset of Tursiyim. That was a type of people. The Shaya b'Yerushalayim, right? We know this in Jerusalem, especially, right? There's the shul of these people and the shul of that people. The shul, right? Shuls often go by Eidah, as we call them, or by certain groups of people like to daven together. Shemachua leRabbi Eliezer. Okay, machua, they sold it to Rabbi Eliezer, v'asaba kol tzrachav, and he did with it whatever he wanted. So now they say, but wait a minute. This is a shul in a big city. A shul in a big city is a problem, right? Ha-ha-tam dikrachim hava. It was a big city, Jerusalem. Nobody thinks Jerusalem's not a big city. So how could they have sold it? So what did they answer? Don't worry about that. It was a very small shul. And they were the sole investors in the shul, it sounds like. They built the shul. It was all their money. Therefore, they could do with it what they wanted, right? You could so see an argument coming, right? You could see this happening, where people want to sell the shul and then people start arguing, but wait, we use the shul. How could you sell it? And you can see the whole scene. They say, look, we put the money down. This is our shul. We built it. We get to decide what we want with it. You come, you don't pay membership. You have no rights to say anything. It's very interesting, especially if you assume this whole thing is financial, which again, it never says anything about money here, but the commentaries assume that they're talking about money. Again, not all of them, but most of them. Meitive. Again, it's another question. And this question is going to come, a question really on Jerusalem itself, the status of Jerusalem. And the laws here are going to be totally different laws. We're talking about a leprous house. Okay, in the Torah, they talk about leprosy on your body, leprosy on your house. Okay, there's different and leprosy on your clothes. So this is leprosy on your house. It says there, Bebeit Eretz Achuzatchem. If you have leprosy in one of your houses, in the land where you dwell, okay? Achuzah is really you got an inheritance, which means, right, Yoshua divided the land by the tribes. So now they say, Achuzatchem mitamei b'negaim, ve'en Yerushalayim mitamei b'negaim. Jerusalem, though, is not considered Achuzatchem. It wasn't given, and we're going to see there's a machloket. Was Jerusalem given as nachala, as we say? Was it given to one of the tribes, or maybe two of the tribes, or was it not given to anybody at all? And Jerusalem is totally public land. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, ani lo shamati ela makom mikdash bilvad. The only thing I ever heard was that Mikdash itself is public land, but all of Jerusalem is not public land. And therefore, what can you assume from Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, which is going to raise a question? If Jerusalem's not public land, then what is he saying basically? Habatei knesiot ubatei midrashot mitamim. Right? You would say the Batei Knesiot and the Batei Midrashot could become a house that's leprous. If that's the case, amai, hadekrachim havu, but that's public space, right? And this is only, Bayit Menuga is only on private space. So this sounds like shuls in Jerusalem are public space, even though we just said, right, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani before said, a Beit Knesset in a city is public space. So how do you explain this? So the answer very simply, right. So first, right, Mitamina Mai had to Krachamavu was big city. So Ema, you should read it as Amar Rabbi Yehuda, and they change one letter, it changes a lot. Ani lo shamati ela makom mikudash bilvad. I only heard about sanctified spaces rather than makom mikdash. Mikdash is the temple. Mikudash is sanctified, which means all shuls are not owned by anyone in particular and therefore can't become leprous. But everything else in Jerusalem is owned and was given out as nachala, and therefore, right, it was divided up by the two tribes, and therefore it fits in perfectly. If you change that one letter, which changes a lot, then it works in well with what Rosh Shmuel Bar Nachmani said. But now that we already talked about this, we're going to go more in depth into this machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis. What's the root of their machloket? Tanakama savar lo nitchalka Yerushalayim l'shvatim. Tanakama basically holds all of Jerusalem was never given to any tribe. You could see why, right? Nowadays, everybody fights over Jerusalem, right? If they gave it to one of the tribes, that would be favoritism. Why did you get Jerusalem and not me? And it basically wasn't owned by anybody. But Rabbi Yehuda Savar, Nitchalka Yerushalayim l'shvatim, he thinks it was given to some of the tribes. Ubi plugta dehane t'nai. And now we're going to see these same opinions in other sources. Titania, here's another bright. Yehuda, which parts, now we're talking about the temple. Now, if Jerusalem was divided up, then obviously the area where the temple was divided up. Now, it still might be, it can't become a leprous house, but it was divided up. So who got what part? You can imagine this was a difficult issue. Who's going to get which area of the temple? So Judah got Harabayit, right, the big courtyard outside. Halishakot, the little chambers, right? There were all these chambers on the side, and the Azarot, the Ezrat Nashim, the Ezrat Yisrael, right? All these spaces that were kind of more public spaces and not as sanctified. Right? The entranceway into the sanctuary, and the Holy of Holies. He clearly got the better end of the deal. Why is that? Well, there was one other thing you need to know, and then we'll see why that was. There's different ways to understand, and since I know some of you use the Schottenstein and some of you use the Koran, I'll tell you that if you look at each one, there's different pictures of what exactly this strip came out. Okay, in the Koran, it's a triangle. In the Steinsaltz, it's not exactly the Schottenstein. It's not exactly a triangle. It's more like the south side. On the south side of the altar and the east side, there was a strip on the east side, a very narrow strip, and the whole south side that was parallel from the altar until the wall, all belonged to Yehuda, even though really the Azara ends there, if you remember. And then that area really, so that we start, the Ulam is Binyamin, the Azara is Yehuda, and the in-between space, which is what we call Bein Ulam LeMizbeach, right? And then from the Ulam LeMizbeach, there's the altar itself. Sorry, there's the altar itself, and then there's Bein Ulam LeMizbeach. That whole area gets a little bit divided. Most of it's in Binyamin, but Yehuda gets a strip of it. Okay, exactly where the strip is, well, right, everyone agrees it's on the east side and the south side, but how exactly it looks is a debate. So now, right, Uba Mizbeach Banoi, and that little strip is where the Mizbeach is built. We're finally going to get to a verse where they actually find some reference to this, right? So, I mean, it does sound like they're making it right. We don't know where they're getting this from, but it's going to come from an interpretation of this verse of V'zot Bracha at the end of the Torah when Moshe gives his blessings to the nations, to the tribes. You'll see Binyamin all the time, like all his life, he saw that this was going to happen in Ruach HaKodesh, right? He had some vision that this was going to be. He was very sad about it all his life. How do we know this? Shneimar chofef alav kol hayom. Okay, that's one of the part of the Bracha Binyamin, which they translate to mean he was right, upset about this all of his life. And lefichach, because he so much wanted this to be part of his property, he knew that this part was going to be split. Because he was so upset about it, God decided to give him the better side of the land. This explains why Binyamin got it. It's a little bit strange because you think if you complain about something, sometimes you don't get what you complained about. But I don't think he was complaining. He was really just really internally said he wanted it so much. So God figures, I may as well give it to the one who desires it more than the other. And that's the Gemara's interpretation here. The height. Okay, so that Tana, now what was the point of this? This Tana obviously thinks that Jerusalem was given to all of that was divided up to the tribes. Okay, so that fits with the opinion that it was divided up to the tribes, and therefore it was private space, right, and not public space. And therefore you could have a Bayit Menuga in Jerusalem. But now we're going to have another Braita. Here we're going to show someone who holds, like Rabbi Yehuda, that it was not divided up. Okay, so now remember he said, right, 1 second. In Jerusalem, Jerusalem, that's Tanakama. He said Jerusalem was not divided up, and that's why it's not Metamei B'Nega'im. So, Detanya, Ein Maskirim Batim B'Yerushalayim. We actually learned this before. You can't rent out houses in Jerusalem, right? You imagine you live in Jerusalem, Aliyah L'Regel comes, it's a great time to make money, right? You could sublet your house for a ton of money. Everybody wants, there's huge demand. Well, you can't do it, according to this. Because believe it or not, if you own land in Jerusalem, you don't actually own land, because it was never really given as nachala, and all the land in Jerusalem is public land. You can't even say, well, okay, I won't rent out my land, but I'll rent you use of my bed. Okay, you can rent my bed for X amount of money. No, even that you can't do. Lefichach, because of that, orot kodashim, if you remember the people, when they would come to Jerusalem, they would bring all their Masershini money and they'd have to buy things with it. And one of the things they could buy was sacrifices. Many people brought lots of sacrifices then. And they would end up with the hides of the sacrifices. So, right, and the meat in many of them, but they would eat the meat, but the hides, they say, they can actually forcefully take them from the people living in their space and say, look, you got to give me something because you can't pay me rent, but at least give me something else, right? This reminds me of my shul also. We have an agreement with our shul. We got the shul to use as a gift, but we have to pay electricity and all those things, right? So they can't, the deal was they weren't allowed to charge us rent, but they charge us for all sorts of other things that come along, right? It's the same kind of idea. So Amar Abaye, Shema Minas, Abaye says, let me just teach you something, by the way, right? If we look at this, there we were looking from the perspective of the person whose house it is. Now he's saying, if you're a guest in someone's house and they invite you for Shabbat, and they're not charging you money, well, they don't say buy a bottle of wine, bring dessert. No, but what they do say is you should leave them whatever utensils you use, like your earthenware vessels that you used when you were there, you should leave them with the people. And you should leave them the hides of whatever animals you slaughtered when you were there. Okay, it doesn't mean go in advance, buy a gift, but whatever's left with you, leave with them, whatever you can leave with them. It's the appropriate thing to do, right? Again, one of these great examples of the rabbi's teaching you what's derech eretz, right? Okay, I'm a Rav. Lo shanu, and of course, yes, I know, I see you writing. I prefer a bottle of wine than a hide. That's definitely true. And not to mention, right, nowadays with germs and all that, I'm not sure I want someone's earthenware vessel that they, their jug that they drank from. But yes, it's an interesting, anyway. Amar Rava, lo shanu ela shalom achlu shiv'at. Okay, now we're going to have a huge exception to this rule. Okay, all these things you can't sell unless you're going to go up in level of sanctity. Rava now says, lo shanu ela shalom achlu shiv'at ve'a'ir b'ma'amad anshe ha'ir. This is if it wasn't sold by 7 good people of the city. Okay, what does this mean? This seems to mean, there's a big debate exactly what it means, but people who are in charge of community things. Okay, they're not necessarily Talmidei Chachamim, they're not necessarily the leaders, but they're kind of in charge of community. Trustees, that's a good word. B'ma'amad anshe ha'ir, in front of the people of the city. Okay, but I'll already tell you this, Shiv'at ve'a'ir, there's a big debate about, whether they're trustees or whether they're something else. It's not really exactly clear. And then, so now this is only if they didn't stipulate and in front of the people of the city. But here's the important part. Let's say they sell, sounds like they can even sell a Sefer Torah and stipulate that we need the money for something else entirely. In fact, we're going to see something very surprising right now. Even if they needed to buy beer to drink, they're allowed to do that. Okay, that's, like the low of the low, I guess, or something, right? Even though I guess drinks were important, but, it's saying even that, okay, they can do it as long as it's these 7 people. I don't know if this 7 is a magic number. It sounds like the Ro'ei Pnei HaMelech we had, right? The Shiva Ro'ei Pnei HaMelech a few days ago. And if they do it in front of the city, there seems to be this agreement, since it's publicly owned things, and because they have sanctity to it, apparently they can do this. Ravina, in his property, in his field, he had this space that was an old shul, had been there at some point in the past. But now it was a destroyed shul, there's nothing there. He says, can I plant here? Right? It's a field. Yes, there was a shul there before. Maybe it's not respectful to the shul. Can I or not? Unless, right, you have to go and, okay, and it's not clear whether he had to return the money and rebuy it or had to just do some stipulation. It's not so clear exactly how this worked, but he says basically go buy it in front of the 7 Tovei Ha'ir, Tovei Ha'ir, in front of the people of the city, and only in that case can you plant there. Rami Bar Abba, but you see it is a solution, right? This is what we call a legal loophole. There's a way to get around it, okay? This happens a lot in halacha where we find a way out. Because otherwise it could create problems. Like at some point you really do need to, right? What's he going to do with this property in the middle of it, right? This area in the middle of his property that happened to be a shul, there's nothing there now. What, he can't plant there, right? It's a big problem. So there are ways around. Rami Bar Abba Havakai Bane Beit Knishta, Kabane Beit Knishta. He was in the middle of building a Beit Knesset. Hava Hahi Knishta Atika. There was an old shul, falling apart, I guess. He thought of a great idea. He said, look, there's an old shul here. Instead of buying new bricks, I'll take the bricks from that shul and the beams, and I'll build my shul with that. Perfect. Well, let's see. He started to ponder, though, the statement of Rav Chisda and think to himself, is this applicable to me or not? Da'amar Rav Chisda, lo listra beknishta ad debane beknishta achrite. You can't take apart one shul until you build a new shul in its place. Okay, you can't, this is a classic problem, right? A shul wants to refurbish, right? They want to knock down the building and build a new one. How do they do that, right? They can't do it unless they have another space to go to. You can't leave the city without a shul or the community, right? Forget about, right? We know there's many shuls in a city, but many people won't daven in the shul down the block. So you have to have a place that people can come to daven. So he says you can't take apart one Beit Knesset until you build a new one. Now, he says, is that the same as me wanting to take these beams out of the old shul to the new one? Why is it different? Theoretically, what's he doing? He's destroying an old shul before there's a new shul. Well, he says, Hata mishum shiuta. He says you can't do it because we're worried. Let's say you knock down the old shul. And then, okay, this classically happens. You run out of money while you're building your new shul, right? I know situations where this has happened. They've run out of money and then they can't build a new shul. So if you're right, there might be a pshiuta, which is you might end up not using the money to build a new shul. And then it'll be a problem that you knock down the old shul. You have no shul now. And right, it's a problem. So if that's the case, ki gavna man. What about in this case? In this case, I'm already in the middle of building. Now, I did say you might run out of money, but let's assume that's not the issue. Let's assume the issue is you might not even, right? You might knock down the shul and then decide, you know what? It's a big headache. I don't want to build a new shul, but I'm already building the shul. So there's no concern of pshiuta. So therefore, maybe it's not really such an issue. So that's his question. So what does he do? He doesn't know. He says, right, is it going to be the same or not? Until the Kamei Rav Papa. He comes for a Papa, and he says, no, can't break down that old shul until you build a new one. And what does he do then? L'kamei de Rav Huna. He goes in front of Rav Huna. He doesn't like the answer. He goes for a Papa. He goes to Rav Huna. And what does Rav Huna tell him? And he says, sorry, you can't do it. And he's basically stuck. And he learns that he cannot take the bricks until he goes to another, right? You can ask, how does he go to a second person? It's always right. There's issue of psak halacha. You can't just go jump around and paskin, check other people. First of all, it all depends on how you get the psak. And I'm not going to get into that. That's a whole other issue. Amarava. Hi Beit Knesset chalufa v'zabuna shari. If you have a Beit Knesset and you sell it, okay, now we're going to learn, this is what I started with Masershini. When you sell that property, okay, or whatever you sell, parts of it, well, we'll get to the parts in a minute. Let's say you sell the property. Chalufa v'zabuna shari. So now you sold it, right? At this point, you can use, whoever bought the shul can use it for what they want, okay? Although we're going to get to tomorrow about things like this, okay? We'll talk about it a little more in depth in tomorrow's daf. But theoretically, what happens is the sanctity leaves the space because it's just a shul. Okay, we'll see. The shul is not the same. Okay, tomorrow's daf we'll talk about this. There's a machloket about exactly what the issue is here, why this works. But the money gets the sanctity. So the money is sanctified. And then the money can only be used for something that, is more than a shul. But the shul itself can actually, right? And then there's this side issue. Rashi says it's because of bizayon. In other words, from the letter of the law, you can sell a shul and whoever buys it can really theoretically do what they want with it. The question is, right, number one, do you have a responsibility to sell it to someone who you know is going to use it for something that's not inappropriate, whatever, however we would define that, or a bizayon, a disgrace to that? Or is it your responsibility or not your responsibility when you sell it, right? Theoretically, legally, it seems like it's not an issue. Rashi brings up in tomorrow's stuff, it's an issue of bizayon. It's just not appropriate, right? To see a shul turned into, whether it's, to go so far as a church, or whether it's, someone was telling me at the end of the Hebrew daf, about the stadium in Tel Aviv, that they sold this big shul and it became a stadium. And then the stadium was totally unsuccessful. And now it's like they destroyed the building entirely. There's nothing there, and that's more like a bizayon. Okay. Some people believe, it's because they sold it and blah, blah, blah. Now, legally, they can, from what we see here halachically, but there is this issue of possible bizayon. It's maybe not appropriate. But here it seems like it's fine. But to rent it out or to give it as collateral is a problem. Why is that? It's a problem because there's nowhere for the sanctity to go. The sanctity is still there. There's no money that it gets redeemed onto that money. There's no, right? Even if you're renting it, that's not the same thing. Right? Renting means I still own it. So it means it still has its original sanctity. My time. So now they explain exactly what I said. Bikdusha takai, right? It stays in its sanctified state because you haven't basically, right, transferred the sanctity to something else. Livnei nami, the bricks also. Chalufinu v'zabnunu share, uzufinu asir. You can sell them and they can lose their sanctity and be used for anything else, but you can't lend them out. Okay. But when it comes to the bricks, that's only if they were old ones, meaning they were already used in the shul. But if they're just new bricks that you bought for use in the shul and then you didn't use them, then it's fine. It's not a problem. However, they bring up, well, there's something called hazmana. What is hazmana? Hazmana means once I decide to use it for something, it can be sanctified for that use. So in this case, with bricks, we don't say that. Okay, now there's a machloket about whether hazmana is significant. That means miltahi means it's significant, versus hazmana is lav miltahi. But even that whole machloket is not talking about a situation like these bricks. Why? Even if you say hazmana is something in that machloket, that's like if somebody embroiders a clothing for a dead person, tachrichin. That can't be used for anything else. Okay, I can imagine also for superstitious purposes when people want to use it for anything else. But basically, these shrouds for a dead person can't be used for anything else, even if you weren't superstitious, because they're designated for shrouds. But hacha, because you already created the shrouds from them. But hacha kitvila aridami, the lekalaman. Nobody thinks this is like when you make the threads, okay, you spin the threads for embroidering the clothing. That's an early stage. Nobody thinks that hazmana at that point makes it sanctified because you're so far from the finished product. That's like these bricks. Okay, so even if you say hazmana is something, certainly it wouldn't be the case here. So if you've never used the bricks, even though you bought them, let's say for the sake of a shul, it doesn't matter. There's no sanctity. Matana. Okay, so we talked about a sale. We talked about renting doesn't work. Sale does work to remove the sanctity. What about a gift? What's the problem with a gift? Right? A gift is full turnover to somebody else. On the other hand, you're missing the sale. There's no, where does the kedusha go? Onto what money? So pliga barabacha v'rabina. There's a machloket chad asar b'chad shari. One says it's no good. One says it's okay. Manda asal b'hai tivka kedushate. Says, on what are you going to put the kedusha? There's nothing for it to go on. There's no money. So that's why it's forbidden. Manda share, he says, ilav dahavile hana amine lo avayavle. Hadar havile matana kizvine. Matana is really like a sale. Why? When I give a gift to you, I gain something from it. I wouldn't give it to you if I didn't gain anything. So what I gain is what, right, that you kind of owe me almost, or you feel some closest to me because of it. That's measurable. That's where the sanctity goes. Now, it's very interesting because it's very intangible. It's not like there's money. What we do with that tovat hana'ah and how we use it is a big question, because theoretically, that tovat hana'ah, that benefit that I got from having given you a gift, and even it could be just that I feel good that I gave you a gift, right? It's something that's basically has the sanctity on it, which I don't know what you do with that sanctity. They don't seem to relate to it, but they seem to say that means it's like a sale, and you actually, then whoever you gave it to as a gift could do with it what they wanted. Tanu Rabbanit. Now we're going to get into, and I see, Gita, you brought up the tzitzit. So now we're going to talk about what you do with mitzvot after they've already, like, what's the distinction between sanctified items, items that we use for a mitzvah? What can you do with them once you're finished with them? Very relevant and interesting issue. Tashmishei mitzvah nizrakim. Tashmishei kedusha nignizim. There's something used for the purposes of a mitzvah that can be thrown away when the mitzvah is over. But if it's tashmish kedusha, if it serves something that's sanctified, then it has to be buried. So elu hein tashmishei mitzvah. Sukkah, lulav, shofar, tzitzit. Okay, all those things, once they're used or they're broken or they're ripped or something, you can throw them out. Now, you say, I know many people leave over their lulav till it gets, bad or wait, and they burn it with their chametz, and the etrogim, people make jam out of them. That's all because we don't want to do bizayon, but not really from the letter of the law. From the letter of the law, you can actually throw it out, okay, according to this. Even though, like I said, people don't generally just throw it out. But okay, bags that you use to protect your sifrei Torah, tefillin mezuzot, tik shel sefer Torah, a bag, right, or a container that it's in, nartik shel tefillin uritzuotehen, and the strips of, like, the box of the tefillin and the straps. Okay, those are all tashmishei kedusha that have to be buried. Amar Rava, Now we're going to have a whole question about all sorts of things that are not on this list, but are not on that list, and where do they fall? So Rava says, originally I thought the bima in Shul, where you put a Sefer Torah on, but there's always a cloth over. So the Torah never touches it directly. So that's serving the cloth, and the cloth is serving the Torah, so it should be okay that you could just throw it out. But then I saw that sometimes people put a Sefer Torah on, so I changed my mind, and can't throw it out. But Amarava, another one. The curtain, Rashi says it's a curtain that's inside the Aron Kodesh. There's another curtain, is a tashmish of a tashmish, because again, it's serving the Torah, but the Torah's already got a cover on it. So it's like a cover of a cover. And therefore I could throw it out. But then I saw that people sometimes take it down and they fold it over and they use it to put the Torah on top of. So I see that it does sometimes serve the Torah directly, in which case it's a tashmish kedusha. Ve'amarava, hai tevuta de irpat. Okay, Rashi explains what all these things are. It's an aron that fell apart, okay, and it's broken. So what do I do with the parts? I can make with it a smaller box, because I guess it's broken. You have to, you can't make something the same size, but you can make something smaller. But korsaya asir. But you can't make a korsaya out of it. Okay, what is Rashi? Korsaya? You can't make a bima out of it, because that's already lesser sanctity. Hi, pirsa, right? Because it served the Torah directly. Hi, prisa dibala. What if you have one of those curtains that fell apart? The me'avde prisa lesifre shari. You can use it for a cover of a book, but lechumashin asir, but not for chumash, only for a sefer Torah. Va'amarava hanis vile de chumshe bekamtere de sifre. Okay, bags that held chumashim and a container that holds a sefer Torah. Tashmish kdushanu nu v'nignizim. Okay, well, that's pretty obvious, to which the Gemara says, Pshita, that's obvious. Well, and there's two different things. There's the cover of the Sefer Torah that is always this beautiful cover, and that's for respect. But if you have this special box that you put the Torah in, that's not for respect, that's to protect it. Maybe that's not what we call a tashmish kedusha, kamash malan that it is. Therefore, we want to tell you, no. Since it serves the Sefer Torah, it doesn't matter if it serves it for respect or it serves it to protect it. It's all one and the same for this issue. There was a big Knesset of the Roman Jews. This means Rashi says it was in Israel, but it was a group that came from Rome of Jews. Okay, now we're going to get into Dinei Tum Avatara. We need to get some background here. They had a dead body in the Shul. Okay, the Kohanim wanted, or I don't know if it was a Shul exactly, but it was a space and the Kohanim wanted to go daven there. Okay, it was actually not really a space of a Beit Knesset. It was a space, and the Kohanim wanted to daven. So they can't daven. There's a beit there. A Kohen can't be with a dead body. Atu Amar le Rava. So they went to Rava. Amar lehu tlu tevota utvua dehave le klietz asur lenachat uklietz asur lenachat eno makabel tumah v'chotzetz b'fnei tumah. Okay, that's a big mouthful. Let's start from the end. Okay, there's something called chotzetz b'fnei tumah. There's something that can be a separation in between. Let's say there's a room and it has two parts to it, or let's say it's two rooms. So you can put up something that can block the tumah from going through. Only things that are not susceptible to ritual impurity can serve as a chatzitza b'fnei tumah. So you have to put something in that entranceway to block it. That's basically can be a stopper to tumah. It has to be something that's not makabel tumah. So what did Rava suggest? Take the Aron Kodesh, which is a very weird thing to use an Aron Kodesh for this, but I guess for the purposes of prayer, it was okay. And put it as a barrier there. Why? Because an Aron Kodesh is not makabel tumah. Why is it not makabel tumah? Because it's something that they call asoy lenachat. This means it's meant to be stationary. What is a kli makabel tumah is a utensil that can be susceptible to impurity. It has to be a kli, meaning something that's movable. Where do we learn this from? In the list of things in the Torah that says they're susceptible to impurity, it lists a sock, a bag, and kli eitz, okay? Now, eitz, they say, has to be like a bag. A bag is something that you carry, and you can only carry it, right, if it's not too heavy to carry. So anything that's too heavy to carry or is not meant to be carried, like it's stationary, then that's susceptible to impurity. This Aron Kodesh, they say, he says, Rava, it's not susceptible to impurity because it's meant to be stationary. People don't carry it, okay? And therefore, we can use it to block the tumah from one room to the other, and that's how the Kohanim can daven. However, what happens, and here you see Rava changing his mind all the time, okay, right? Just in the beginning also, like all of a sudden he realizes that things aren't exactly what he thought they were, right? This goes back to actually the other daf we had about the blind person and the perception, right? Until you see it, you don't always see things the way other people do. You don't always see everything that goes on until you see it. So what happened? He says, oh, let's do this. Amrule, Rabbanan the Rava, and this is smart, right? The people there, even though Rava was this great, they said to him, but wait a minute. But sometimes this, we actually carry this aron sometimes. And therefore, right, Kiman of Sefer Torah, I'm not really sure of the reality here, but sometimes the Sefer Torah is on it and it would be carried. And therefore, that's the category. If you can carry it when it's full or empty, okay, what this really means is not only when it's empty, but even if it's full, it's not too heavy. Let's say you have a really big utensil that if you filled it up, it would be too heavy to carry. That's not susceptible to impurity. This can be carried full and empty. And we do sometimes carry it, to which Rava says, Ihachi lo efshar. Well, then I'm changing my mind. Then you can't use it. They don't say how they resolve the issue. Maybe the Kohanim had to daven somewhere else. Amar Sutra. Mitpachot svarim shebalu. What do you do with old Sifrei Torah covers? Osimotam tachrechin lamet v'zoi gnisatan. This is a kill two birds with one stone, right? You use it for something that is actually gniza. It's going to be buried. So you use it as shrouds for a dead person. What if you have a Sefer Torah that fell apart? You have to give it to him. Talmid Chacham will know how to deal with it properly. There's a great line. Even if you're not really a Talmid Chacham who learns Torah Be'iyum, but you just learn halachas, that's good enough for this. Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, you see their right gradations of how their hierarchy of who they thought was more important. Not someone who just learns halacha, but someone who really learns. Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov ubekli cheres, and it has to be put inside an earthenware vessel. The Sefer Torah, it's not enough to just put it there, right? Bury it. This is a scroll in the time of Yirmiyahu that they put inside an earthenware vessel. So they say this Torah scroll the same. Okay, last line for today, which is really tomorrow's daf. Amar papi mishmei de Rava mibei knishta lebei Rabbanan shari mibei Rabbanan lebei knishta aser. Rav papa mishmei de Rava mane ibcha. Okay, they each have a difference of opinion what they think Rava said. Can you turn a Beit Knesset into a Beit Midrash? Or can you turn a Beit Midrash into a Beit Knesset? One said you can go in one direction, and the other said you can only go in the other direction. That's a very famous issue. What's more important, a Shul or a Beit Midrash? I'm going to leave you with that question for today. Have a great Shabbat, everybody, and we'll meet up on Sunday.